Sounds good. Well, listen, you're living in Toronto now, is that right, Brandon?
Yep. Yeah, in
Okay.
Toronto.
I did catch that on your LinkedIn. Um, so on this, let's call it a podcast. So like on this episode, you would be representing Canada technically, and
Oh,
I
cool. No
I
pressure.
am I'm just a little bit curious because I haven't been back in Canada for a while. I guess what's going on up there? Like there's certainly news that pops up on my YouTube feed. It, is it a wild exaggeration of sentiment of what's going on up there, or basically like is it just business as usual, or is there rethinking Canadian identity? Like how profound is it?
I would say when everything like first started happening with Trump and the whole 51st state and the whole there definitely was like a period of a little bit of a freak out like like we were not expecting this and uh since then there has definitely been this sort of like feeling of like there's a sense of like national unity or like pride in being Canadian where before I think especially for young people like speaking for myself like um there's like things to be proud of for sure but there hasn't really been an event since I've been at least like politically conscious or at least like conscious of like current events or the news where I was like oh there's a potential threat and now that the country there is a threat against us now I realize how important it is that we have this sort of like identity and this sort of like sense of shared purpose so I would say that like it is pretty profound if you watch Canadian news like at least the news that I watch it's been like all about that essentially especially like
Yeah.
as we're going through like a federal election at this point huge issue. But I don't know. It's not like all of my conversations that I have with people are about that. I would say it was sort of like a blip in the, oh, we're now all thinking about this and we're now all talking about this, but now it's business as usual. It's just the business is kind of a different tone now.
Okay. Has it changed? I'm nervous to ask this question actually, but I am also feel like more curious. Um, has it changed the way that Canadians perceive Americans? And that's such a broad brush question to ask one person, but
Yeah. I would say like not really.
okay.
At least like, Americans in terms of like there's a clear separation between like the current administration and everyday Americans. Like everybody here understand. I mean, not like 100% of people, but I would say the vast majority are able to separate the administration versus like everyday Americans. Like we know that
Okay.
not every everyday American is signed up to this sort of like doctrine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was I mean because we're definitely living in a time period now where nationalism, national identity, a lot of that stuff it's not just a US Canada thing, right? This is everywhere. It's getting stoked.
Yeah.
And so I do kind of wonder what sentiment is. Obviously, being in the US, we see a really skewed view of what's going on, right?
hmm
And actually, you probably don't consume American news media, but obviously, me being here, I do. If I watch something from the CBC, it really does make it sound like that there's a huge threat,
Yeah.
to Canada. If I watch the American news, you get no sense on the American side that there's even threatening, right? In the true sense, right? So it's very kind of one-sided in terms of where the emotions tend to be running really high, which that might be a classic American kind of thing, right? That
Yeah.
that, that might actually be part of a bigger phenomenon that frequently happens. But
Yeah.
um, so which hence the question, right? Like what is it really like on the other side, and sort of how are people thinking about it? But it sounds like most people are just kind of going about their daily life.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, there's actually on the whole like news coverage perspective thing, it was brought to my attention there's this company called Ground News. I'm not sure if they're Canadian or what, but the sort of whole pitch is that like they sort of aggregate news coverage from all major outlets. And so if you like click on a headline on ground, they'll actually show you like you can see like this is what left-leaning news says about it, this is what right-leaning news says about it. Like um there's been sort of like I think there's like I'm interested in like a new place to sort of get news, which sort of like compares how different outlets are spinning the same thing, you know? Because for Canadian news, like I look at the CBC, I read the Globe and Mail for a while, but yeah, it definitely just gives you one perspective and it doesn't give you like the whole narrative or like the whole conversation that happens. Because sometimes I'll go on like Google News or something, which just lists, it does sort of the same thing where it has a topic and it'll list headlines by different outlets. And I'll see something in the Financial Times, which is sort of a more right-leaning Canadian newspaper, and it's like the opposite of what the CBC
Mm.
is. Like it's a totally different perspective. So yeah, I think there's value in finding an outlet that gives you like a fuller picture of the conversation that's happening.
Yeah. On that, Brandon, this is just it's a totally blind, innocent question. Is the CBC left-leaning? Is it liberal slanted?
I would say so, yeah. So the
Okay.
CBC it's a crown corporation as well, so it's publicly funded.
Okay.
And yes, I would generally say that it's left-leaning, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't have any strong opinions about, which way it tended to lead until they started talking about Mark Carney,
Yeah,
and it just seemed like they were really selling him hard.
100%, 100%.
Okay. Okay, so that wasn't just my imagination.
No,
I
no,
was
no,
like,
that's definitely.
I do get that, Trudeau had become very unpopular and that, the conservatives were, usually there's a shift in party when that happens. But they were going at a level that, I would see liberal news media here when Kamala and Trump were going against each other, try as hard as they could to sort of do everything they could to push, in a certain direction. I got that vibe a little bit with the CBC with Carney. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that as well.
Okay. Okay. So that's not an imaginary sort of issue. Okay. But politics aside, it sounds like kind of everything else is kind of going, and you guys have cheaper eggs than us, at least from what I can
Yeah,
tell.
true. From what I hear, yeah.
It's quite real. Like it for let's see, gosh, it's been months now, but I've gotten used to kind of going to the grocery store and not even being able to get eggs and then having to ask, and so the shortage thing, at least on the eggs, has been, yeah, that's not just a headline, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, for real.
um,
Wow.
I don't know if the influencers or the people that you're following on YouTube, about what opinion do they have about eggs, by the way, or do you have an opinion about eggs?
Um, an opinion about eggs in general. So I just read a book by Michael Pollan called The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Hmm.
And it's sort of about the industrial food system in the US. And it turns out that like the factory farms for eggs are actually like very, very cruel. So my opinion of eggs has like fallen somewhat. I like them because they're like a good source of protein and they're like pretty cheap. But I personally don't enjoy eating them all that much, depending on how they're done. And yeah, there's some like social costs associated with them. So I'm lukewarm at
Yeah,
the moment. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, this is why I tend to bias towards organic, because yeah, the whole sort of chicken-based or pig-based, actually, or actually any of the meat industries. Now that I think about it, like I remember years ago I saw a documentary about one of the, I think it was about beef and how beef gets processed. Like these are just things you don't want to see. And I remember when I was in consulting, there were these guys in the office who were staffed on a case for a I don't know what to call them, a beef manufacturer processor, meat processor, I guess. And like that company's first big innovation, what they were famous for was figuring out how to not waste any part of the cow,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So they had somehow found someone who would buy something for some reason of every single part of the cow.
yeah.
And but then when they went and they were staffed on site, like these guys just couldn't eat meat for a while, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that is not, Yeah, meat is one of these things where like I think it has this feature, but it's not normal necessarily for you to go see how the product that you buy is made and to be so kind of grossed out that you wouldn't want to actually consume it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I wonder what it was about it because like meat, this was kind of like one of the points of the book, was that meat, the consumption of meat, it includes death in the process. Like there's no getting around it.
Yeah.
And the system that we have kind of like brings that as far away from your thoughts as possible. It hides it as best as we can. So we kind of forget that this thing was living and
Yeah.
thing died and now you are eating it. Like even when you describe it like that, like it sounds pretty gross.
Yeah.
Apart from like the whole industrial process of doing that. Yeah, so I'm curious in that documentary whether it was the fact of like just the fact of like, oh, something died and now I'm eating it, or if it was something about like the specific processes they were seeing that they were taking issue with.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, it can't be that appetizing to see in a factory process of carcasses, right? Of any type kind of go by. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah. I mean yeah, who would find that necessarily like super appetizing? So
Yeah.
um yeah, I mean that's all true. I think there is something about this. I was in Mexico not too long ago and have you ever been to Mexico, Brandon?
I have, yeah.
Okay. So have you ever been to one of these churches where they mix Catholicism with like indigenous beliefs and then like as part of a ceremony they will actually bring a live chicken and literally like snap
No,
its neck like
wow,
there?
no, I
Okay.
haven't.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I did actually witness one of these, right? And it's even seeing that, which probably in the context of like thousands of years of human history, like people would largely have been desensitized to, I would
Mm,
think, right? Because if you eat chickens, that's like a thing. Um, it was like not super comfortable, right? Because you'd sort of see the chicken kind of wobbling around, and then they do it, right? And
yeah.
even this, we're kind of, or at least I was squeamish about, and so I imagine many others would be too. So we're sort of better off. We feel like we're better off when we have no idea that that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But yeah. Yeah, but then like is it better to like face what's going on so that when you do eat meat, you're sort of aware of what has gone into it and like
Certainly not from a marketing standpoint,
not for marketing for
okay, but let's get out of the business school mindset for a moment, right? Like you're talking about morally, ethically,
yeah.
conscientiously, right? And yeah, it's a fair kind of good question, right? But yeah, but we tend to live in more of a corporate world, I think,
Yeah.
than that one.
That's
So
yeah.
yeah, no, I definitely see that. To think that you can beat the index, or that you would even want to try, right? And full disclosure, I tend to be in that camp just because I enjoy it. But particularly when the index returns have been so good, like, do you
Yeah.
really think you can beat 20+%? I don't know if we're going to look at that this year, but
Yeah.
it's hard to come up with a narrative. And just even from a strategy perspective, index investing makes so much sense because in some sense it does the work for you of trying to pick who these like large scale winners will be, like the big tech firms, for example.
Mhm.
Um, by having an index that drops the low cap losers and picks the kind of highest cap winners, you're naturally kind of picking these winners as long as they get to grow into mega size, which in the US you definitely generally get to, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, so that game is very hard to beat and very hard to pick in advance.
Yes.
Like, man, I true story. What when I was in grad school, so this is even long before I met you, I used to go to like a stock investing club in San Francisco when I was doing my PhD at Berkeley. And I remember, I'll never forget this. There was a guy in the room who was talking about NVIDIA and
Okay.
how they were going to revolutionize like the world with their chips, right? Like he had this level of excitement that actually matches the stock price performance today. But but I mean, he really kind of was telling this narrative. And then the guy who was running the meeting pulled up the chart, and the stock had like not really done anything right at that
Mhm.
point, right? It
Mhm.
actually looked pretty terrible. It looked like it was going nowhere. So no one in the room got excited about it,
Yeah.
right? And the guy kind of got, once he saw that no one else was really gonna buy into this, he kind of faded away into the corner. But if everyone in the room had bought, even me in grad school had bought, even a relatively small amount of NVIDIA at that point, I mean, I don't know if it would have been life changing, but it certainly would have been a far better return than anything else we talked about that day. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's hard to see these before they actually get there.
Hmm.
Right. So I think, do you know who Masayoshi Son is?
I don't think so.
So he's the guy that heads SoftBank over in
Okay.
Japan.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So, okay. So at some point, like, you'll hear about him because he's famous for making these like
Huge bets, right?
huge in a way that like makes huge look tiny,
Gotcha.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a guy that like his fortunes swing between something like bankrupt and richest guy in the world like more than once,
Yeah.
right? And so a level of volatility that most human beings actually I couldn't imagine could physically survive, but
Mhm.
he does this. He actually I've heard was an early investor in NVIDIA. I think this is true. And if he had rode that like the way he rode Alibaba, like I mean he would be up there. But he sold way before like any of it actually took off in Nvidia. So I mean if people like that even can't sort of get it systematically right, then it's a really really hard game to play. Which always makes me fascinated by Warren Buffett, how he's able to have the batting average that he does, right? Without
Yeah.
doing tech for the most part
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And he said that like for most people, I think he's like owned up to the fact that like luck played a large role in his success and that most people should probably just stick with low cost index funds, right? Like I'm pretty sure that's true. He said that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think he generally advocates that everyone should go and pick stocks, right? Like
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah.
So, um, okay. So if you're an indexer, you're probably also not doing crypto either. Then would be my guess.
I have like a small amount in crypto. This was before my sort of like index come to Jesus moment, but a small amount in crypto. I never look at it. It just sits there. If it goes to the moon, it goes to the moon. Yeah.
Good attitude to have. Yeah, and yeah, right. A lot of crypto, from what I can tell, is very much meme based, which
Yeah.
I have tremendous difficulty like managing. If I don't even try it because I know my personality. The moment I get in, there'll be a part of my brain that basically asks like, "What are you doing?" Like
Yeah.
there is no reason economically why this thing should move. And so if you want to do memes, you shouldn't think like that, right? Like you have to think in a very different way. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah,
I wonder, like some of the perspectives that I heard on like why this is a thing, essentially, is just that like the hype behind it is such that like it sort of convinces people that there's a chance here to like get it like hit it really big, really fast. And
yeah,
if they sort of see maybe they consider that to be their only like realistic way to get to some level of wealth or like, that it's a fast way as opposed to like a slow way, and they're not really sure like how to go about doing it the slow way or like the correct way, then um, yeah, that's why these things sort of take off. But yeah, as far as I can tell, it's kind of all hype based. I sat beside a pretty big crypto person on a flight once, and they would tell me about how like, oh, this country is like adopting crypto officially, whatever that means. Like the people who are in it will always be able to point to like these are some real developments, and like this year is going to be the year, But yeah, it just hasn't seemed to happen yet, I guess.
yeah, not yet. But to kind of reinforce the point that you made that, for some people it's like buying a lottery ticket if you don't feel like you have many other ways. I can't prove it, but I have a deep-seated suspicion this is why crypto took off so early in South Korea. So,
Mm,
um, South Korea has become like if you live in Seoul, real estate is outrageously expensive at this point. Actually, a little bit like Toronto now that I think about it. But and the average wage, it's not bad, but it's not enough for you to necessarily, if you just go work at some big company, that you're going to turn out okay in 25 plus years, right? And it's such a grind, like it's such a huge grind. And so, and entrepreneurship and building, there is an industry there, but it's not like the US, right? And I don't know that it's even necessarily like Canada in the same way. So you have a certain amount of capital, but you're not going to make it big. And so crypto, I could see end up being appealing because if you can 25x in a month, that changes your life, right? If you can do that.
100%. But on the whole timing thing, like if it shoots up 25x, I'm thinking like, what about 50? Like, are you gonna keep going? Should I get out now? And then
Yeah,
it
yeah.
crash comes, and that's why the timing thing is so tough because you don't know where bottoms and you don't know where peaks are. So, nah.
And you need a personality that's kind of okay with taking 100% losses, right? When
Yeah.
you as well at 25, I don't know, maybe I'm too old for that. I feel like that would literally kill me if I kept trying to do that systematically over and over again, right? Just the stress of riding through that. But yeah, yeah, okay. So yeah, not necessarily doing anything big crypto. Yeah, you're much like me. Um, so uh, there's a lot of stuff that I still kind of have questions about. So Brandon, since we've last chatted, so it's been 7 plus years. One of the things that I wonder about is, do you feel like there was something that we as a collective educators, like in school, should have taught you and everybody else that we didn't? I know that's a very loaded question, but now that you're kind of dealing with whatever you're dealing with, whether it's, you said mostly career that you're focused on, right? But I mean, even kind of more broadly with life.
Uh, that's a it's a very big question.
Yeah, sorry, we can go smaller, by the way, if you
No,
feel
no,
like.
that's okay. That's okay. Hmm. Yeah, I think that like in the past little while I've been thinking more about like so I think school is very good in terms of like I mean depending on what program you do like Ivy is very good for this and I did the joint program with engineering so like double good for this is that it gets you into your working life. It really like sets you up good for that in terms of like earning an income and starting a career, which is great.
Mhm.
That's already like more than a lot of people than it's a better start than a lot of people get already for sure. Um, Eventually though, I think so coming out of school, my main focus was career. Um, there comes a point which I think I'm starting to hit, which is once you reach a certain level and a certain point, like if you're not motivated by money, the motivation sort of dries up a bit,
Mm.
and you have to figure out like where it comes from at that point. I don't have this entirely figured out for myself, but a lot of the thinking that I'm doing recently has come from like looking at current events, like seeing the problems that are present in the world and wondering if there's something that I could be doing to fix those things. It also could just be something as general as like like where do I get the meaning in life? Like what are the things that I do that provide me a lot of like meaning and joy? And these are the kinds of questions that I think don't get asked a lot they don't get asked a lot in school and education systems. There were
Yeah.
definitely people at Ivy that did. So I took the social enterprise class. I can't remember what the professor's name was. But I mean, you did this as well when you ask questions about like happiness, like what makes people happy. Like there are definitely people that did that and like do ask these questions, but definitely as a whole, I think these there are deeper questions that the system generally doesn't get people to think about.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you another dangerous question. Why do you suppose that we don't ask those questions?
Um,
Is it an
be,
accident? Is it an oversight?
no, no, I feel like no. I don't think
Yeah.
probably not. No, I think like there's a couple things. There's Well, the product of a it's like how do you define success for your students? It's much easier to define success in terms of like higher rates and dollar amounts and like I don't know, standardized test scores, like where those exist, like that kind of thing, than it is on like a happiness metric. Like especially like if I'm like I can see myself as like if I'm a parent and I want to send my kid to a school, my sort of main like we can talk about happiness and fulfillment all we want, but it's much more tangible and immediate to talk about like what is my child's like economic future going to look like after they go to this school. And honestly, maybe the more that I think about it, it's like the more economically you're sort of like set up, you can afford to worry about these deeper questions about like, am I fulfilled? Like, am I happy what I'm doing? Like, maybe there is a period of, there's a gauntlet you have to run for the first 10 years or so of your career, and then you get to worry about these problems. That could be the case. Um, yeah, yeah. Not so it is kind of intentional, I think.
I very much, as someone who, went through it and then now participates on the other side, on the education side, right? It does strike me as intentional,
Yeah.
as opposed to, oh, how did we miss this one? Right. So, and of course the question is why, right? It's, I'm going to go out on a limb here and draw a very messy analogy. So if you want to have a really well-functioning democracy, right, one perspective is that you need to have people who have a lot of unbiased information that they're getting and a lot of critical thinking and education, right?
Mhm.
In practice, though, if you were gonna want to win and kind of control, a populace of such a democracy, it's not clear that's actually what you would want, right? You would kind of want to tell simple narratives, and you wouldn't necessarily want to give an unbiased kind of information stream, right? And then you would do this because it basically buys you power and control, right? That you get a distortion that comes up. So, you know, it, so it shouldn't necessarily be shocking, like, in a lot of countries that you tend to see now a lot of divisiveness. Social media just exacerbates this times 10, right?
Yeah.
Because the algorithms basically only show you what reinforces your worldview, like nothing ever challenges you, right? And so you go down these horrible rabbit holes. Whereas before, maybe you might have noticed something in the newspaper that might have been slightly in a different direction, but now you don't, right? Um, so that one you could argue like, okay, I mean, it was supposed to be in this utopian idealized version one way, but the reason why it's the other way is because it kind of gives power and control, right? And actually it serves a purpose, right, for a group of people. Now that sounds somewhat conspiracy theory-ish, right? And I'm not really conspiracy theory kind of camp at all about most things, but I could kind of see why in education there isn't a strong voice. I'll tell you this on our side. In faculty meetings, as well intentioned as everybody is, which I think is true, like what I talked about in my book and like what we're talking about, what you've just mentioned in terms of like, what about the meaning part and all this? This is basically a zero still. Like, in fact, like it just doesn't even, it's not like somebody brings it up and then we have a debate and then we have, kind of conflicts over how important it is. It just doesn't even come up, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of striking when you think about kind of the mismatch about what we do here. And when you guys are going through the system, I was certainly the same way, right? When I was a business undergrad, like you guys in some sense don't know to ask that or to care about that or to so that's why that train just keeps going, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of yeah, and to your point, I agree with you. I think you and I think the same way about this. It seems more intentional than it does seem accidental.
Mhm.
Even if not everybody in the system realizes that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Totally agreed. Yeah. And you're right that like when you're a student at that age, you're right that like you don't really know how to ask these questions. Um, because of the environment too. Like I'm reading a book right now. I read a lot of books. I keep reading books.
Yeah.
I'm reading this book called Burma Sahib, which is sort of like a fictional telling of George Orwell's early life as a
Hmm.
policeman in Burma. And part of what's like shown in that book is that it's just sort of like the environment that you get put in as a young person sort of forces you to comply with what the authority structure sort of like wants you to comply with.
Yeah.
It's just like designed in the environment, like everybody else, you see everybody else talking about these things or like shooting for these goals, and it makes you want to shoot for them too because it's what your peers are doing. The professor or the speaker in all your classes is like a really charismatic person. Like the things that they're talking about are legitimately interesting, and so it does make you, want to participate in that. The building is beautiful. Like, it gets you in
Yeah.
that sort of mindset. Like, and like none of these are like individually bad for sure. But I'm just, as an individual person, like going into the system, it's not like if you had some problem with like, oh, there's like a lack of meaning here or something. Like, that's going through nobody's mind, I would say, in HBA one, I would say. Or not nobody, but not many people's minds. Also like your prefrontal cortex like isn't fully online at that age. So I don't know. There's
Eh,
your
yeah.
critical thinking skills aren't 100% yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's totally true. And I do think, there are multiple reasons why, historically in wars, that it's usually young men that get picked to go off and die. Because if you had a bunch of older guys, it's not just that they're physically, maybe not in the same condition, but they may not be as malleable, right, to sort of do this. And so there's this old expression, what is it, that war is old men talking and young men dying, right? And so yeah, a sort of cynical view, but I think actually captures this, which one thing that I think is positive in all this though, is that this does appear to be changing, right? If you take a really big step back and you look at, how many options did younger people have for, throughout most of human history, like how much freedom, how much, kind of thinking about what do I want to do with my life. I mean, how many people actually asked about meaning,
Mhm.
right? With an open-ended choice of like I get to pick as opposed to somebody tells me what the meaning is, even if I don't like it, I have to accept it, right?
Mhm.
And it does seem like that we're shifting it to something quite new, which we're totally unprepared for. I don't think there's it's like yeah, wildly unprepared for. So because nothing in the system is designed to kind of help people kind of find that. So I mean, Brandon, to make this practical, right? I think we both sort of agree on the problem. What would have helped you if you had gone through it to get you ready for finding this kind of bigger sense of meaning? Because as you say, the motivation runs out at a certain point, right? If you don't have something deeper, if it's not just the money.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a it's kind of a tough question. That's a
Okay.
very I don't know if there's one thing that really would have helped. Like, should we have a social worker or a therapist in the school that you have to go talk to like once a month? Like maybe
I mean, maybe, right?
that sort of like helps you ask yourself these questions. Um, like maybe something like that would work. Maybe something like that would work. But I think a lot of it is just a function of me getting older and getting more information about how the world works, realizing that I'm going to die someday and maybe I should think about doing something that I enjoy. Like I think a lot of it is just like going through the process of living.
Wow, you've already gotten to that mortality realization already?
Well,
Has that
maybe
happened?
maybe light. I don't know. Like this isn't like a quarter life
Okay.
crisis or anything, but I have thought about it.
Okay. I would say you're actually relatively early on that. How many of us were actually talking about this in our 30? I'm not sure it was that many because we were just still very much in aspirational mode, right? Like,
100%. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
like just I'm still definitely like in aspirational mode as well. Like, I see a path forward in my career if I choose to like continue pursuing it. I still have like big picture things that I would like to do and accomplish. I would say that it just in the past like year or two, I've been stressing a bit more about the urgency of them. Like I gotta hop to it. Like I got time, but the sooner I start working on these things, the better.
And just so I understand what things you're talking about, are these things like marathons, or are these things like your bigger social goals, which are quite huge, actually, the way you articulated them?
These are the bigger social goals are. It's definitely one of them. The other thing is the music thing, like having music be more involved in my life at some point. So like when I was young, my dream was to like be in a band, play
Yeah.
metal music, like that kind of thing. I recently got the opportunity to start doing that, so that's like a tick off the bucket list. Um, yeah, those are the two main things I would say. Sort of like a pivot into music in some capacity, and then yeah, I don't know, maybe affecting some social change somehow.
Yeah. Um, just kind of dumb observation here. The music seems like the easier goal of the two. And
It
the
does. Yes. Yes.
and I don't know if you've actually pinned down which social goal you want to go after, because usually single humans tend to focus on one because the world's
100%.
problems are a bit numerous.
Yeah. No, I haven't pinned one down. I'd say like the feeling is just that there's been I just have the sense that like if you don't do it, nobody's going to. There's no guarantee that anybody else will, and so you should probably contribute somehow.
I see.
Um, yeah. As for the specific goal, I don't have that pinned down at this point.
Okay. Okay. But you're sort of someone who's got the energy and the sort of time and interest and resources, but you don't necessarily know what it is yet. I mean, this sort of thing, it's not a, as you know, it's not a rational decision so much as an emotional. So it'll be something that tugs at you. Like you're gonna see something, you're gonna
Yeah.
read about something, and you'll be like, oh no, like
Yeah.
and it'll either express itself as like this is really not okay, like I'm really not okay with this, or it expresses in a different way where it's more like joy, where you see someone actually starting to do something to try to solve a problem, and then you get the energy positively. Like either way, it can go. But yeah, for those types of things, that's typically how it manifests. Brandon, do you feel like the challenges that you've mentioned here, that they're very similar among you and your peers, or are you an outlier among your peers? In other words, is everyone else just like, man, I just want to double my pay in a few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't want to put words like I'm guessing. I'm definitely
Sure.
guessing. I asked them about this. Um, I would say that pr- I think my peers are generally like a little more like grounded in their goals, I would say. Like I think I get the sense that most people are interested in like getting a dog, get the house, start a family, like those kinds of things. That's what I get the sense that most people are thinking about. Definitely
Hmm.
not everybody, but yeah, I get the sense that that's what most people think about.
Got it. Okay, so not as much conversation around social problems or these
Yeah,
types of
yeah.
things.
I definitely have a couple of friends that do think about that and like are actually very involved, but they are the outliers, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean this matches also what I feel like I've observed right over long periods of time. That and I think an interesting question is what makes you guys different from everyone else? I mean, it's obviously that you have this different perspective, right? Or different values, maybe in terms of weighting. It's not that they don't value the same things, but I think the weighting is heavier for you guys on these things. And it's something that I actually don't know the answer to is like, how did you end up this way and how did they end up that way?
Good question. I don't I don't know.
You don't know either, right? Yeah,
No.
I'm not sure. Like it almost makes me wonder whether you guys were essentially born with the mission, but without knowing it, and then and then it just gets clearer.
Yeah, I don't know. I've definitely thought about that. Like I think to like some of the conversations that I've had with my with my parents, and I do sometimes wonder like how much genetics or my specific upbringing plays into how I think about these kinds of things. Um, it's definitely non-zero. It's definitely non-zero. I think I get the sense that I have a more how do I put this? How do I put this? I don't know how to I don't know how to describe this.
Is this like social awareness that you're talking about, or you're talking about something else?
No, not it's sort of just like a demeanor that I'm that I'm considering at the moment.
You think about these things that other people don't in the same degree?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to fully process this thought. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure why that is the case. Because there's a couple things I can point to, right? It's like if you're well off, if you're not like in an economic, if you're not living paycheck to paycheck, you can't afford to think about these things, right? Like
Right.
that's one. Um, you know, if you're in bad health, you can't afford to think about this. That's the other thing. Um, I think I do think a large part of it is like you do have to enjoy learning about the world and learning about sort of unsexy topics because you want to know how things work because
Yeah.
nothing is as simple as it first appears. Like there's complexity in everything. And so if you're not somebody who enjoys dealing with complexity or, you know, reading about things because that's what you like to do, then these things just like you'll either like not want to engage with problems or you'll never even see the problems in the first place. Um, so there are some like individual differences in like how people think that I think affect their level of engagement with these kinds of things, you know. Like if you want to spend mental energy on something that is ultimately of no consequence, you have lots of opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
That's
That's
kind
fair.
of what I'm getting at. Yeah, I mean, spectators, but like, you know, there's lots of TV doom scrolling, that kind of thing that you could be doing as well. But yeah, there's way to like sort of exhaust your brain as maybe like an avoidance strategy for thinking about the bigger questions of
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Oh, I like that. That's a really great way of phrasing this, right? So let's sort of frame this differently. Like, let's say your brain's a muscle, right? And so some people really enjoy working out or just, doing the equivalent of hitting the gym with their brains all the time, right? So that muscle gets stronger, it gets bigger, all that stuff. Um, there are other people that just enjoy sitting on the couch and not
Yeah.
kind of using that, right? And there's a contrast there. Not judging, right? Totally understand that there's a need for breaks and all this, but certainly there's a temptation, I think, in modern society to not work out, so to speak, with the brain.
Yes. Yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah, and yeah, like I'm not saying that like if that's the sort of way people choose to spend their free time, I'm not saying that there's even necessarily a problem with that per se. I would just hope that it's better if it's a conscious decision versus a this is what's more comfortable to me to do each
Yeah.
day, and so I'm just going to do it. And then, you know, I think this is why people maybe have sort of crises in general is because they get to a certain age and then they realize like, oh no, I'm 50 and I've just been sort of like going to work and then chilling on the couch at home. Like, yeah,
Yeah. I think there's, and again, like I haven't lived a full life, so I don't want to say too much. I'd feel like I could say many more intelligent things if I was in my 70s, right, commenting on this. But it is true, I think, that people often hit a crisis point. It does depend partly on kind of how you run your life, even from a young age. But anyone who was sort of given an external mission or a role or a very strict structure, and then kind of performance metrics attached to that, and told basically go run, which is a huge number of people, right? That implicitly or explicitly get told us, whether it's by parents or the school system or whatever it is. I mean, there's an awful lot of people like this. One of the debates I had before with a faculty colleague, actually, when I was at Ivy, was what would the world look like if you didn't have this? So, in other words, you didn't have a bunch of insecure kids who felt like they needed to achieve to fill the hole.
Yeah.
Like, would you see just a lazy world where people didn't want to do anything, or would you actually see a happy world that's even more productive, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, this whole this sort of like touches on the concept of like where does your motivation come from? Like, are you extrinsically motivated or are you intrinsically motivated?
Hmm.
Uh, Extrinsic being like you sort of need a goal from outside to like tell you where to direct your energy, right? Um, and I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, I feel like if you took away, it's a good question. It's a good question because like I'm thinking about myself, like, working as a software engineer doing so like my first job going out of school was I worked as a technology consultant and the main clients that I worked for were insurance clients,
Hmm.
sort of redoing their internal systems. And if there is no extrinsic reward for that kind of work, I'm not sure anybody would ever do it. Like it's just not interesting. It's just really not interesting. Like you could do it for the love of the game, but yeah, I don't know. Like with the whole system that we have right now, um, I think a lot of work requires that extrinsic motivation. Um, I don't know what would happen if that goes away.
Yeah, I oh, okay. So I don't, you're talking about just kind of how we structure in society incentives. I wasn't even really talking about that. It was more, I feel like just even before you get to the point of holding carrots in front of people, do you have a child grow up and basically discover what they love and it's told like just do what you love and it's all going to work out, right? Take the leap of faith. Let's say that's one message. You take
Yeah,
another kid, let's call this an experiment, right? Another
yeah,
kid and you say, um, my love for you is conditional on what you can achieve,
I
right?
see.
And your value is attached to that, right? As terrible as that sounds, that actually is a message that a ton of kids get, right? Because partly because it's an effective motivational tool to actually go get stuff done, despite the long-term sort of damage. And what I wonder about is, I think there's way more of the second category than of the first in the world. If you look at high achieving people,
Oh, in high achieving people.
right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, so that's where what I'm using as my kind of quote unquote evidence or the sample, right? Like, how many high achievers did it because they're in the second camp, right? And trying to do that. I think it's an awful lot. And so, well, what if you instead took those kids and then you didn't do it that way, right? You were going to go with strategy number one, right? Just do what you love. Would we see a whole bunch of people show up, for these painful jobs or not, and just say like, you know what, even that amount of money not worth it. I'm just going to go do my own thing now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, hmm. I feel like you would kind of expect that, Like there's a lot of jobs that are like very high compensate, like very well compensated, but like they're pretty miserable.
Yeah.
Like the work-life balance is just not there. The work itself is like not that fun. So I think yeah, maybe those jobs just go away. Maybe. Hmm.
Or they just pay more, right, to get someone to show up, right? Because the price ends up getting higher, right,
Yeah,
for doing that.
I don't know, but like I don't know if a job pays you $1 million, but nobody's willing to do it, will raising it to $2 million make anybody do it? Like,
If you're trained in economics, the answer is supposed to be yes, right? That's
yeah,
so in other words, you're trading off, and at some point, the market will work itself out, right? If the job
yeah,
needs to be done.
yeah. Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's an it's kind of a what if question, but if you observe that, just like I do, and I think Brandon, I'm guessing you would agree, lots of high achieving people at core, it's about self worth. It's about kind of messaging they got when they were younger. That drives a large part of why, because at some point you don't need to make more money than a certain dollar amount, right? Like there just isn't going to be, you're not going to get on that marginal kind of X number of dollars, you're not going to feel that much better, right?
Yeah.
About whatever that's going to get you. And
Yes.
yet we see people still kind of going up and away, right? At tremendous cost. It's not like, that doesn't cost anything. It costs a ton. And so the question is, well, why do they do that? And I think at core, a lot of it is that, right? It's the self-worth thing. And
Mm.
so if you were really cynical, right, you could say that actually that's a great way to structure society to get people to do things that frankly no one really wants to do. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that if this was going to be intentional? I don't know that this was intentional per se in that degree. That would really be kind of a level of foresight that's incredible as well as diabolical. But um,
It's it's it, it's similar to like it's similar to like evolution in the sense of like evolution can build really elegant and well-designed systems, but there's no intention behind
hmm,
evolution. It just sort of does things at random, and whatever works the best survives. And that's how all of this happens, you know. And so yeah, it can definitely be the case that like nobody planned all of this in advance, but the way it happened is like the system has come out in such a way where like this sort of behavior is incentivized in a really effective way. The whole concept of emergence is something that I I think about a lot. Um, which is the whole, are you familiar with the term emergence?
I actually am not, other than the English word, but you mean something much more
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah.
So
It's emergence is the fact that like when you zoom out or zoom in to different at different scales of a system, different scales of the same system have different properties. So for example, the concept of temperature.
mhm,
At the atomic scale, there's no concept of temperature. Like temperature only exists when you zoom out to our level because it emerges out of the properties of the underlying system.
I see.
And you can extend this to how, like, well, atoms don't have emotions, but when you zoom out, emotions or love or things like that can emerge out of the properties of the underlying parts. Which then is like, does temperature exist? Like, at some scales it does, at some scales it doesn't. Like, just because it doesn't exist at the subatomic level doesn't mean it doesn't exist for us. Um, and so the way that this relates to what we're talking about is that um, I think when I first started becoming more aware of like these society level problems and incentives, like you're right, they do look as if they were designed, if they were designed and planned, it was by a very, very cynical person.
Yeah.
And what I've started thinking is that like just because the rules of the game are very cynical at the macro level of human society doesn't mean that they're cynical at like the individual level of human society. And that's sort of like what I've been thinking about recently is it's just like just because things are like oof, on like one level doesn't mean you have to have a similarly like dour outlook on the individual level.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's absolutely kind of what I've been thinking about in a different way. So I just finished teaching an executive MBA class, really great students. And one of the students, he asked me at the end of class, like, what do you see in the future? And because the class was basically about technology strategy, it was all about kind of AI and different technologies and how, and then their final project was to basically be speculative, right? Pick a company, be speculative, and then tell us how it's going to play out, right? Or how you would do it. And I thought about it, and actually my answer to him was, look, on the macro level, if you look at the news, if you look at all this stuff, it definitely does not look, it's not trending positively. at least at the
Yeah.
moment, right? At a minimum, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's dissolving and collapsing. Um,
Mm.
and and then we sort of don't exactly know what's going to come up next, right? If you're an optimist, you'll say, well, we'll just come up with something better. If you're a pessimist, you'll say like, oh man, like, this could really go off the rails. But on a micro level, right, I actually have seen the exact opposite. Like I see a lot more people talking about things like meaning or questioning more, or I don't know how to describe it. I'd almost say it's like a change in consciousness. So I'll articulate it as a story. So, Brandon, I loved you having you as a student, but I have to be honest. At that time, the vast majority of Ivy HBAs who would come to my office, the vast majority, were just asking about. They were basically soldiers with a very narrow mission, right? And so they would talk about like, okay, I got this offer from this place and this place. How do I interview with this, or how do I negotiate this offer? Like nitty gritty kind of stuff. And not necessarily, at least at the outset, much conversation about, well, what is it you want to do? Like, what really lines up with you? By the time I made it to NYU, right, I had an undergrad student telling me that, I could go work at a place like Goldman Sachs. And I was chatting about this with my friends. And, the topic of our conversation and the question was, do you really want to be a slave to capitalism? Right. And I was shocked to hear this. Right. I'm teaching in a business school. Right. She's my RA. And I thought back to even my own undergrad days. I'm like, we were fighting tooth and nail to be slaves to capitalism. Right.
Yeah.
Nobody dared question whether there might be something up with the system or maybe this wasn't like such a great. There was absolutely none of this whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that just reflects a shift. It's just a societal shift, right? Is all it is. This has nothing to do with intellect or anything else. But to be asking that question at like 19 or 20, which, I certainly didn't, and by and large, the IBHBAs didn't, but they might be now, I think was already starting to reflect kind of people starting to wake up a little bit, which I find fascinating because it definitely didn't happen because of any professors, from what I can tell, or a school that was just like, you know what, guys, I think it's about time we like really tried to focus more
Yeah.
on holistic. Like there was absolutely nothing like this going on. So it had to have come from somewhere else that I can't kind of trace. But yeah, no, I'm actually pretty optimistic about things like this playing out. Some of it is playing out in a how would I describe this? There is a sort of almost revolutionary kind of energy where people know that they're unhappy with their job. So Great Resignation is a really great example. The bunch of people who are really kind of just had it with their jobs, rightfully so, I think, in the vast majority of cases. But then their solution was like, I'm just going to quit, right? I'm just
Yeah.
gonna do that. Um, Without a kind of a grander understanding or a grander plan, this is kind of a problem, right? Because what you will discover is that you kind of need to go back, and if you don't know what you're doing, you might even go back to what you were doing before, just at a different company, which I think a bunch of people did in that resignation. But the energy was there, right? Like the feelings were all in the right place. There just wasn't any kind of knowing place or good structure to kind of channel it to see like real reform. So I interpret that event as kind of like one of the first big signs at the macro level of, there is change coming. It just needs to figure out how to manifest, right? And I think, we will see that in some way, shape, or form. I have a feeling there's a lot of the explosion of life coaches these days. I think is that in part.
Is that an explosion? I didn't know.
Certainly, it's an explosion of the number of people who call themselves a life coach.
Yeah.
Um, that's probably not a crowd it sounds like that you hang out with or would have bumped into, but
No, not in my in real life. No.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I, like I will say that it seems like in as far as the like as far as like podcasts and things that I listen to, I have noticed that I get recommended by the algorithm like very life coachy type podcasts for sure. Like if I start to listen to somebody for like a certain type of content, like fitness content, it turns out that they also make like sort of life coachy type content as well. Um, yeah, it's a weird. I guess I have seen that. It's an interesting thing.
It is an interesting thing. I recently saw the Minecraft movie in the theater,
Oh yeah. Okay.
and there's a scene where one of the characters who's kind of he's middle aged and he's really hit his dead end in life, advertises himself as a life coach, which I feel like is a
Oh,
play on this, right?
there
So
you go.
yeah, there's a lot of because there's no certifications or anything as far as I know for this kind of
Ah,
thing. Not like university degrees at least or anything on that level. So
yeah.
oh, and what makes a good life coach? It's a really good question. So
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned that I was curious on. So you mentioned that as part of like your tech strategy course, part of the final assignment, you wanted people to be speculative and sort of make some predictions on what will happen in the future, right?
yeah.
I'm curious why. Why do you think it's important to get students to try and be speculative?
Oh, okay. So let me give a little bit more detail about that
Sure.
assignment.
Yeah.
So you had to pick a technology, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's robots, whether it's, something else, self-driving cars, for example, and things like this. And then pick a company who's either a disruptor in that space or, shall we say, an incumbent that would be affected by the disruptor.
Hmm.
And basically play out the chess game strategy wise of what would be very likely to happen. And the reason why I do this is because strategy actually is quite predictive about how things will play out in a number of different industries. So it's kind of once you've had core, and now I teach you some extra concepts in tech strategy. Um, like teach yourself or sort of demonstrate to yourself that you can actually be predictive about the future because these are businesses at core, right? That are actually kind of functioning and given everyone's competitive advantages and their profit motives, what would we end up seeing? And so I'll give you a concrete example. So I had a team that presented from the perspective of Uber, right? And what are they going to do with the rise of autonomous vehicles, right? And what they were specifically thinking about mostly was things like Uber for trucks.
Okay.
Yeah. But less so, like, oh, let's call a truck, right? The way you would call an Uber, but more about like these self-driving, once the self-driving technology takes over, like you have these kind of point-to-point trucking kind of systems that start to evolve, right? So one of the things that this team discovered is that the winner in this space almost certainly will not be Uber, but it will be Amazon because they have made such because and they didn't figure that out until they were working through it as Uber and then realized that Amazon had already built out a lot of the infrastructure for this already. And actually, to be frank, Amazon's probably just waiting for that tech to and then you're going to see tons of Amazon trucks on the road that don't have drivers, right?
Hmm.
So this is very already kind of clearly laid out, and they had already so many more advantages than Uber that they could kind of see who was going to corner that and how it was going to play out. And so the only thing with these things is you don't really know when, you just know
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
coming, right? And so this is the sort of thing that where it gets kind of interesting, right? And people kind of talk about, you know, what could the future look like? Now, that's very different if I teach it to them and just throw out, because it sounds very wildly speculative and almost kooky, right? If I were to say stuff like this, it's completely different if they're in the weeds and they're playing it out themselves doing that. And so
Uh-huh.
that's why it's kind of a fun thing to do. But then you also realize like who's really going to dominate at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
For
yeah.
for all these things.
Yeah, super interesting. Got it. Right, because when you mentioned the sort of nature of it without getting into the details, what they were actually doing, my initial thought was sort of going back to the whole investing, like people picking stocks and speculating. It turns out that like not many people kind of know what they're talking about, you know? Um, and even like when even like sort of talking heads on the news, like you always see examples of like how often like people will just sort of say stuff that just isn't right. Like they'll make a prediction about what the economy is going to do in the next six
Yeah.
months. None of that ever comes true. But the yeah, this sort of like tightly bounded scenario based sort of prediction like makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it cracks me up that you're picking on, it sounds like you're mostly picking on financial news. When they have guests, it drives me nuts, actually. The older I get, I used to be way more tolerant of this. And I get why it, works this way, but especially lately, right? You want to talk about a period of uncertainty. Everybody's, got multiple guests throughout the day, whether it's Bloomberg or CNBC, or it would be BNN, I guess, up in Canada. And when I see like the summary short blurb, like on YouTube, like the headline quote from this person, if you really just looked at the quote, they're not saying anything,
Yeah.
right? It's like we're in a period of a lot of uncertainty right now. Like really,
Doctor.
right? Like it's what cracks me up is that there isn't actually a sarcastic YouTuber that takes every single thing from the financial news that an expert says
Yeah.
and then just sarcastically responds to like every one of them because you do begin to realize how completely like empty most of these
Yeah.
comments actually are, right?
Yeah.
Because it's always variations of it depends, or the one that drives me the most nuts. Sorry, I'm stumbling on my words today. Is when someone says it's a stock picker's market, right? And I'm always trying to think of like when is it not a stock picker's market,
Yeah.
right?
Like where
Who
do the
would
predict-
ever say like, yeah, you don't need to pick any particular stock. Like you're going to be
Yeah.
fine no matter what you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Never. Never say that.
Um, yeah, yeah. I just find these like absolutely kind of frustrating. But it's fascinating. Finance is the one world where, you learn, like my undergrad degree is in finance. And sadly, as someone who grew up really believing strongly in the value of education, like I really thought that everything I learned in my finance class was going to really help me pick stocks, which it, by a wide margin, does not really help that much for a whole number of reasons we could talk about. But in other words, the models are not very good to sort of, since you have an engineering background, we can describe it in this way. And so you have a world where the models in school are pretty bad. You have people that do systematically make money, right, in different ways, but where something like the efficient market hypothesis says those people shouldn't exist,
Mhm.
actually, that it's not possible, and that price really tells you everything about information at a given point in time, which is actually at core not really provable directly, right? Like, how would you actually know that that's the case? Um, and then you have a whole bunch of people like playing in the market who comment the way that you hear on CNBC, which really gives the impression that most people don't really know, right? Like
Yeah.
and then the only reason the game works is because economies tend to grow over time, no matter how badly things go. Things generally kind of trudge upwards. So buy and hold generally works, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that sort of unclear. It's a very it's a very messy game. It will be very, very interesting to see what happens with the financial system in the coming years. I know you're an indexer, so I don't want to say anything more to sort of make you sort of doubt whether that would be a good idea or not. But having an unsustainable government deficit like the US does, and yet implement what will probably be tax cuts soon, as well as put in tariffs, it's not super clear who's going to start buying all the bonds at the end to fund the deficit, or whether we'll be able to keep that train going the same way, right? And that's an interesting question to see what kind of world we're about to see, right? Um, do you ever take finance, Brandon, other than HBA one?
No, apart from the mandatory finance and economic GMM classes that we had, I never took anything else.
Yeah, it's probably to your credit. I'm not sure it's ever actually helped me to take all the finance classes that I have, but
Cool.
yeah, because most of it you don't even need the finance degree for, right? Like if you just kind of watch kind of what happens and think of it this way, I do think that having an engineering background though, like that perspective can be very, very helpful. Have you ever heard of Renaissance Technologies, Brandon?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I've heard of them. Yeah.
I don't think these guys have a single finance person by training in their entire staff.
It's all what mathematicians, engineering That,
Yeah, math and physics Olympiad winners.
yeah,
What I find fascinating about this group is you never, by and large, see them ever show up on financial news channels,
yeah, yeah. Very
right?
hush hush. Yeah.
Very hush hush, banging out 30+% returns every year.
Insane. Insane. But I think the story, I know I think there's a book that's been written on them, which I haven't read, but my understanding is that they essentially did a large scale application of machine learning to and kind of like high frequency trading like decades before everybody else did, right? Like they've been running that
That's
kind of
my
like
understanding. Yeah.
crazy.
Um, yeah. So, yeah, when you have a group of people that, and then not constrained by the theories of efficient markets or anything like this, then, yeah. I do not know of, it breaks my heart to say this, right? But I do not know of a finance professor who's been able to build a hedge fund that matches those same returns, right? And of course, okay, if anyone ever watches this video, I'm pretty sure I'm going to hear an example from someone at some point who gets irked by this statement. But there are definitely really top tier finance professors I know who have tried and actually failed to manage money actively, right? So it makes one wonder kind of how good the model is, I guess, if you were going to use that model.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. The other sort of like bit of the index investing thing is the whole factor model angle
Hmm.
on investing. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. When you consider the five factor model explaining like 97% of returns or something ridiculous like that, like yeah, the whole literally unless you're Rentec and you have an insane like I don't know what you would call it, like human capital slash technological advantage that nobody, it's impossible for anybody else to replicate. Like, yeah, I'm just not sure how active makes a lot of sense. Um, Unless if you go into it knowing that this is largely a gamble, but I'm aware that it's a gamble and I'm going about it responsibly, you know?
Yeah. The only thing I can tell you as a rebuttal to give you some hope, because if you frame it that way, you shouldn't even try, right? If it's
Yeah.
like Rentec or indexing, I mean, that's pretty clear for all of us, right? What the answer is there. Um, in the US, there's an organization called the American Association of Individual Investors. And one of the things that they did is they basically replicated what the hypothetical investment strategy would be for a number of famous investors. So, for example, Warren Buffett, they basically kind of tried to figure out like what is his investing style if we had to codify it. Of course, it's
Oh,
not going
okay.
to be perfect, right? It's like a very loose thing. But then they made it into a stock screen. They ran every month where they would just buy all the stocks that would pass the screen, if you will, and then each month just rebalance and do the churn, right? And then track it for like a really long time, right? Many years. And what's fascinating about that exercise that they did is you actually see massive differences based on which screen gets picked, right? And so massive differences. So massive actually that if you actually believe the returns that they simulated, that there's two or three of them where not only would you have outperformed the index, you would have outperformed by an incredibly wide margin just doing the simple dumb screen over and over again. Um, and you would have beaten the crap out of all the other screens that are on there, right? And they have this long list, right, of famous investors, and they simulated this. One of those screens that has just destroyed it is one called Can Slim. I'm guessing you, by your facial expression, you've probably not heard of this before. So there's this guy in the US. I think he's still I think he's retired now, but he's the guy that founded that newspaper, Investors Business Daily, if you've ever heard of it. His name is William J. O'Neill, and he basically made a fortune buying hot growth stocks, and then he formalized it into a method. And the method is not rocket science. It's like increasing earnings growth, right? Like that kinds of stuff. And the company has something new, right? New product or service, that sort of thing. But that screen, at least the way that they've codified it, has killed the market by a wide margin. It doesn't do it in every single year because growth stocks get killed in recession years or bear market years. But when in general, like the market does well, like those stocks do really well, right?
Yeah.
And so um, there was a professor, I forget where he's a professor now. I think it's somewhere in Indiana. He actually wrote a paper based on these screens because I was like, if this is killing it, like why isn't everybody doing this, right? Right, that's the obvious question. And so I looked for any kind of finance academic out there who had tried to actually verify that this stuff was real, right? Because one explanation is that those returns are not actually real. And this guy had basically gone through the data and run essentially his own simulation to kind of confirm like that this stuff could produce, that it wouldn't be killed by things like transaction costs and a bunch of other things, right? And he found that even if you took all that stuff into account, you would still see significant outsized returns, right?
Hmm.
Which seems obvious then that someone should make an ETF around this or just run a low cost mutual fund with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yet I haven't seen anything like this. So it's one of those puzzles out there that sort of sits with me about why is that?
Yeah. I wonder. Yeah, so when they first of all, like what I always hear from like the factor investing people is that like any like so for example, if an actively managed fund happens to beat the market, if you actually control for the factors, then the alpha goes away. So
Mhm.
like whatever strategy they used, well, it just happened that they picked like profitable stocks, about like small cap value stocks, like all those sort of like classic factors, and like it all went. So I'm curious if something is is happening there, but I also think like it just sort of I'm just not sure. Like maybe index fund implementations just haven't really gotten there yet. So like a factor based ETF, like so that exists in the US as far as I know, but it doesn't exist in Canada. Like it's not easily accessible for Canadian people. And so maybe just implementations haven't caught up to the research. I'm not sure when that research was done, but that could be the case.
Yeah, I think this was like over 10 years ago. But
Uh,
um, it's a good question. Yeah, and whether that's just explained by factors is a legitimate question, right? Like, are we just looking at, factors at play, right, in
yeah.
terms of these types of things? Yeah, it's a good question. Don't know. I mean, one has to wonder whether, because the S&P 500 as a mechanical structure of how it selects, I mean, it's pretty simple, right, at core. There's not, and the way it was designed was not necessarily with some deep intention of this is how we pick winners, right? That wasn't even the intention. It was just like, oh, this is just an index we're going to track, right? Um, so one has to wonder whether there might be a way to do even marginally better without, causing any trouble or anything like this. And I'm sure there are places that propose these kinds of things. But the fact that there hasn't been any candidate, at least that I'm aware of, to show major outperformance when you do that, I find is quite curious, right? If that's the case.
Hmm. Yeah, the other thing that popped into my mind was when they were analyzing the performance of this screen, um, did they just run it on like the historical data of like what had actually happened in the market previously? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what you can do, right? Because I actually many years ago I briefly subscribed, had a subscription to this organization or a membership, and then you could actually go back and download the historical like stock picks by month. So if you really wanted to, you could actually like truly backtest what the
Mm-hmm.
picks were with their own software and kind of really kind of hash it out.
Yeah.
Um, and I think he did a version of this. I think, or he may not. He might have just tried to run the algorithm somewhere else. But yeah, it's an interesting It's an interesting question. I mean, if you ever sort of are curious about growth stock investing, he wrote a book a long time ago, the guy William J. O'Neill. It's literally just called How to Make Money in Stocks. Like there's
Right.
no
Okay.
right. So in some sense, I guess he wrote the book, right? But that is his style, and yeah, it has a loyal following because growth stock investors, they're all going to be in a similar camp, right? About how they find their names. So
Right. Yeah. Similar to like how dividend investors, I think, form like a camp and they sort of subscribe to a similar, you know, like putting a lot of importance on dividends, sort of like defines their strategy.
yeah, that's true. Actually, that's very interesting that you bring this up. Yeah, they find they end up being self-reinforcing with each other, and they don't seem to want to drift from that into the other worlds, right? So
Yeah.
the same way that the meme stock group on Telegram or Signal probably doesn't start dabbling in value investing or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I when I was first looking into crypto, I took a peruse on the Bitcoin Reddit, and geez, that page has drunk the Kool-Aid for sure. There's some wild posts in that of like 80% of my net worth is in Bitcoin and I'm just gonna keep stacking. Like people definitely there's definitely some people that go like all in on strategies like this.